The owner of a struggling restaurant allowed a homeless woman to take home leftover food. You'll be surprised by the result of this good deed. The aroma of spices and fresh herbs filled the air of the small restaurant, Mary's Kitchen, as Robert Garcia, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes, carefully stirred a pot of stew. His hands, calloused from years of work in the kitchen, moved with the precision of a craftsman. Each gesture, each ingredient added, was a silent tribute to Mary, his late wife, whose smiling portrait presided over the entrance of the establishment. The tinkling of the doorbell pulled Robert from his thoughts. It was Linda, one of his most loyal customers, entering with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Garcia," Linda greeted, sitting at her usual table by the window. "How's everything going?" Robert wiped his hands on his apron and approached the table. "Good morning, Linda. Well, you know, we're still here fighting day by day," he replied with a smile that didn't quite hide his concern. Linda, perceptive as always, noticed the tension in Robert's shoulders. "Is everything all right? You seem tired." Robert sighed, sinking for a moment into the chair across from Linda. "I'm not going to lie to you, things are difficult. With the recession, fewer and fewer people are coming in. Prices are going up. But I can't raise mine or I'll lose the few customers I have left." Linda reached across the table, giving Robert's hand a comforting squeeze. "This place is special, Mr. Garcia. We all know it. Better times will come, you'll see." Robert nodded, grateful for the gesture. He stood up, composing himself. "Well, what can I get you today?" "The usual." "Of course," Linda smiled. "Nobody makes a stew like yours." As Robert returned to the kitchen, his gaze lingered on Mary's photograph. "Oh, my love," he murmured to himself, "how I miss you. I don't know if I can keep our dream alive." The day passed slowly, with more empty tables than full ones. As evening fell and Robert was about to close up, he noticed a familiar figure huddled by the entrance. It was Sarah, a middle-aged woman whose face reflected years of hard life on the street. Robert had seen her several times in recent weeks, always in the same spot. Without thinking twice, Robert packaged up the day's leftovers in a container and went outside. "Good evening, ma'am," he said softly, offering her the food. "I thought you might like to have something warm for dinner tonight." Sarah looked up, surprised by the gesture. Her eyes, a deep blue, shone with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, taking the package with trembling hands. "God bless you." Robert smiled, feeling lighter for a moment. "It's nothing. We all need a helping hand sometimes, don't we?" As he returned to the restaurant, Robert couldn't help but think about his own precarious situation. Bills were piling up, and the bank had started pressuring him about overdue loan payments. But looking back and seeing Sarah enjoying the warm food, he knew he had done the right thing. That night, sitting in the empty kitchen, Robert took out his old photo album. He slowly turned the pages, pausing at images of Mary and him when they first opened the restaurant, so full of hope and dreams. A tear rolled down his cheek as he caressed the photograph. "What am I going to do, Mary?" he whispered to his wife's image. "I can't let our dream die, but each day gets harder." His eyes fell on a photo of Emily, his daughter, now living in the city pursuing her own career. He hadn't told her the truth about the restaurant situation. He didn't want to worry her. "So I promised you I'd take care of our legacy, our home," he murmured, closing the album. "And I will, no matter what it takes." With a deep sigh, Robert stood up. Tomorrow would be another day, another battle. But for now, exhaustion was overcoming him. He turned off the restaurant lights and went up to his small apartment on the upper floor, carrying the weight of his worries and the determination not to give up. As night fell over the city, Mary's Kitchen fell silent, holding within its walls the memories of better times and the hope for a new dawn. The next morning dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky itself shared Robert's mood. As he opened the restaurant, his movements were mechanical, the product of years of routine. The jingling of keys and the creaking of the door as it opened echoed in the nearly deserted street. He had barely turned on the lights when the doorbell rang. Robert turned, surprised by the early visit, and found himself face to face with someone he hadn't seen in years. "Mike?" Disbelief tinged his voice. Before him stood Mike Thompson, his old childhood friend. Time had passed for both of them, but Mike looked impeccable in his designer suit, emanating an aura of success and confidence. "Robert, old friend." Mike's voice resonated with enthusiasm as he approached to give him a hug. "It's been so long." Robert returned the hug, still stunned by the surprise. "Mike, what a surprise. I didn't know you were in town." Mike smiled, his white teeth contrasting with his tanned skin. "I just arrived. I'm expanding my restaurant chain and thought I'd stop by to say hello to my old friend. How are things going here?" Robert made a vague gesture with his hand, trying to hide his discomfort. "You know, with its ups and downs. Would you like some coffee?" As Robert prepared the coffee, Mike surveyed the place, noticing the details that revealed the passage of time and lack of renovation. "This place hasn't changed at all," he commented, his tone oscillating between nostalgia and something Robert couldn't quite identify. They sat at a table, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee floating between them. Mike took a sip and nodded appreciatively. "You still make the best coffee in town, Robert." "Thanks," Robert replied, allowing himself a small smile. Some things never change." Speaking of changes, Mike leaned forward, his eyes shining with an intensity that Robert remembered well from their youth. "I've been thinking, what would you say if I offered you a business opportunity?" Robert raised an eyebrow, cautious. "What kind of opportunity?" "An investment," Mike replied enthusiastically. "I could inject fresh capital into this place, modernize it, make it part of my chain. Imagine it. Robert, a Mary's Kitchen, renovated and ready to compete in today's market." Robert's heart skipped a beat. On one hand, the offer sounded tempting, especially considering his financial situation. On the other, the idea of giving up control of Mary's legacy gave him a knot in his stomach. "I don't know, Mike," he finally said. "This place is more than a business to me. It's the dream that Mary and I built together." Mike nodded understandingly. "I get it, friend. But think about it. Wouldn't Mary want the restaurant to thrive? With my help, we could take it to the next level, secure its future." Before Robert could respond, the door opened again. It was Sarah, the woman he had given the leftovers to the night before. She seemed to hesitate on the threshold, as if she wasn't sure she was welcome. Robert stood up immediately. "Good morning, Sarah. Please come in. Would you like some breakfast?" Mike observed the exchange with curiosity, his eyes evaluating Sarah from head to toe. Sarah entered timidly. "Good morning, Mr. Garcia. I wanted to thank you for the food last night. I don't have any money, but I was wondering if maybe I could help with something, cleaning or—" "That's not necessary," Robert interrupted kindly. "Sit down. I'll prepare something for breakfast." As Robert headed to the kitchen, Mike followed him. "Who is she?" he asked in a low voice. "A woman who needs help," Robert replied simply. Mike frowned. "Robert, you can't be giving away food in your situation. If you accepted my offer, you could help more people like her, in a sustainable way." Robert paused, looking at his friend. "Give me time to think about it, okay?" Mike nodded, pulling a card from his pocket. "Of course. Here, call me when you're ready to talk seriously. I'll be in town for a few days." After Mike left, Robert brought a plate of eggs and toast to Sarah. The woman ate with evident gratitude, while Robert observed her, lost in his thoughts. "Is everything okay, Mr. Garcia?" Sarah asked, noticing his concern. Robert smiled weakly. Yes, just difficult decisions, you know." Sarah nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that lead us to where we need to be," she said softly. Robert looked at her, surprised by the depth of her words. There was something about Sarah, a hidden wisdom behind her tired eyes, that intrigued him. The rest of the day passed with the usual routine, but Robert's mind couldn't stop spinning. Mike's offer, Sarah's enigmatic presence, the bills piling up, everything mixed in a whirlwind of doubts and possibilities. That night, after closing, Robert sat in the empty kitchen, Mike's card in one hand and a photo of Mary in the other. "What should I do, my love?" he whispered to the photograph. "How can I save our dream without losing its essence?" The silence of the night offered no answers, only the echo of his own doubts and the weight of a decision that could change everything. The following days passed in a whirlwind of emotions and postponed decisions for Robert. Mike's offer weighed on his mind like a stone, while Sarah's constant presence had become an unexpected comfort. One morning, as Robert prepared to open the restaurant, he noticed Sarah watching him from the entrance, her thin figure silhouetted against the dawn light. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted her with a tired smile. "Would you like to come in?" Sarah nodded, entering with cautious steps. "Mr. Garcia, I wanted to thank you again for your kindness. I was wondering if I could help with something today. Anything." Robert looked at her for a moment, considering the offer. The truth was he could use all the help he could get. "Well, if you really want to help, you could clean the tables and maybe help in the kitchen. But Sarah, you don't have to do this." "I want to," she replied with a firmness that surprised Robert. "You've shown me more kindness than anyone in a long time. It's the least I can do." And so began an unexpected routine. Sarah would arrive early each morning, helping with the restaurant tasks. Robert noticed that, despite her fragile appearance, Sarah worked with an efficiency and skill that spoke of a very different past from her current situation. One afternoon, as Sarah peeled potatoes in the kitchen, Robert couldn't contain his curiosity. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" "You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She looked up, her eyes reflecting a mixture of caution and resignation. "Go ahead, Mr. Garcia." How did you end up on the street? You have skills. You're intelligent. I don't understand." Sarah put down the knife, her hands trembling slightly. "It's a long story, Mr. Garcia, one I'd rather not remember." Robert noticed the discomfort in her voice and regretted asking, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." Sarah shook her head. "No, it's okay. I suppose I've been keeping it to myself for too long." She took a deep breath before continuing. "Years ago, I had a very different life. I was an accountant at a major company. I had a good job, a home, a family." Her voice broke for a moment, and Robert resisted the urge to comfort her. He knew Sarah needed to tell her story at her own pace. "But everything changed when I met a man. He was charming, successful, eager, promised me the world. I fell in love like a fool." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out he was a con man. He used my position in the company to access accounts, stole millions. When it all came to light, I was the one who paid the price. I lost my job, my reputation, everything." Robert listened in shock. "But couldn't you prove your innocence?" Sarah shook her head. "He was too clever. He left evidence that incriminated me. Nobody believed me. My family turned their backs on me. My friends disappeared. In a matter of months, I was left with nothing." Silence fell heavily in the kitchen. Robert realized he had misjudged Sarah from the beginning. Behind her fragile appearance was a woman who had faced an unimaginable tragedy. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." She gave him a sad smile. "You couldn't have known. Nobody does. I've spent years trying to forget, to start over. But it's hard when nobody gives you a chance." Robert moved closer and, in an impulsive gesture, took Sarah's hands in his. "Well, here's a chance. I don't know how long I'll be able to keep this place open, but as long as it's here, you'll be here too." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Mr. Garcia. You don't know what this means to me." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. Mike entered, his presence immediately filling the small kitchen space. "Robert, my friend, I've been trying to reach you." His gaze fell on Sarah and their intertwined hands. "Oh, I see I'm interrupting something." Robert quickly released Sarah's hands, feeling inexplicably guilty. "Mike, I wasn't expecting you. Sarah was just helping me in the kitchen." Mike observed Sarah with a look that Robert found strangely intense. "I see. Well, have you thought about my offer?" Before Robert could respond, Sarah let out a small gasp. Both men turned to her. "Are you okay?" Robert asked, concerned. Sarah had visibly paled. Her eyes were fixed on Mike, a mixture of fear and shock on her face. "You," she whispered. Mike looked at her with an expression of confusion that Robert thought seemed slightly forced. Do we know each other? Sarah seemed to recover quickly. No, I'm sorry. I got confused for a moment. If you'll excuse me, I need some air. She hurried out of the kitchen, leaving Robert and Mike alone. Quite an interesting character you have working here, Mike commented with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But let's get back to business, Robert. What do you say? Are you ready to take this place to the next level? Robert looked towards the door where Sarah had exited, a feeling of unease settling in his stomach. Something didn't add up, but he couldn't pinpoint what. I need more time, Mike. It's an important decision. Mike nodded, his smile becoming tenser. Of course, my friend, but don't wait too long. Opportunities like this don't last forever. As Mike said goodbye and left the restaurant, Robert couldn't help but feel that he had just witnessed something important, though he didn't understand what. Sarah's reaction, Mike's attitude. Everything seemed to be part of a puzzle whose pieces he still couldn't fit together. That night, after closing, Robert stayed up late, going over the day's events. Sarah's story had deeply moved him, but now it mixed with a growing unease about Mike and his offer. As he looked out the window of his small apartment above the restaurant, Robert realized he was at a crossroads. The decisions he would make in the coming days would not only affect his future, but also Sarah's and Mary's legacy. With a sigh, Robert headed to bed knowing that sleep would be elusive. Tomorrow would be another day, and with it, new challenges and revelations that threatened to change everything he thought he knew about his life and the people around him. The next morning dawned with a palpable tension in the air at Mary's kitchen. Robert was anxiously awaiting Sarah's arrival, the questions about her reaction to Mike still fresh in his mind. When Sarah finally appeared, she seemed to have aged years in a single night. Her eyes, normally bright and alert, were shadowed by deep circles. "Good morning, Sarah," Robert greeted cautiously. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly. "Yes, Mr. Garcia, I just didn't sleep well last night." Robert hesitated for a moment before speaking. "Sarah, about yesterday. Do you know Mike?" Sarah visibly tensed. "No, like I said, I got confused. He must have looked like someone I knew a long time ago." Robert wasn't convinced, but decided not to push. "All right, look, if there's anything you want to tell me—" "There's nothing to say," Sarah interrupted, with a firmness that surprised Robert. "Can I start with the cleaning?" Nodding silently, Robert watched her as she walked away towards the back of the restaurant. Something was clearly wrong, but he didn't know how to approach the subject without pushing Sarah away. The day passed with a strange atmosphere. Sarah worked in silence, avoiding eye contact with Robert. For his part, he was torn between his concern for her and the growing financial pressure of the restaurant. Near noon, as Robert prepared lunch, the phone rang. It was Emily, his daughter. "Dad, how are you? It's been a while since we talked." Emily's voice brought a smile to Robert's tired face. "Sweetheart, it's so good to hear from you. I'm fine. How about you? How's everything in the city?" "All good, Dad, but I'm calling because I'm worried. I talked to Aunt Linda, and she told me the restaurant isn't doing well. Why didn't you tell me?" Robert felt a pang of guilt. He had been hiding the truth from Emily to avoid worrying her. "It's nothing, honey. You know how businesses are. They have their ups and downs." "Dad," Emily's tone was reproachful. "Don't lie to me. You know I can help. I can come back, work with you." No, Robert interrupted. "Your place is there, building your career. Don't worry about the restaurant. I'll manage." "But Dad..." "Emily, please, trust me. Everything will be fine." After a few more promises to keep her informed, Robert hung up the phone with a heavy sigh. He hated lying to his daughter, but the idea of her abandoning her dreams for the restaurant was unbearable. When he turned around, he found himself face to face with Sarah, who was looking at him with a mixture of understanding and something that seemed like guilt. "Mr. Garcia," she began with a trembling voice, "I think we need to talk." Robert nodded, feeling that they were finally reaching a crucial point. "Let's go to my office." Once in the small office, Sarah sat down, nervously wringing her hands. "I've been thinking a lot since yesterday. There's something you need to know about Mike." Robert leaned forward, all his attention on Sarah. I'm listening. Sarah took a deep breath before beginning. The man I told you about yesterday, the one who ruined my life. It was Mike. The revelation hit Robert like a punch. What? But, are you sure? Sarah nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Completely. He's changed a bit over the years, but it's him. Robert. That man is dangerous. Please don't trust him. Robert leaned back in his chair, trying to process the information. But why didn't you say anything yesterday? I was afraid, Sarah admitted. I didn't know if you'd believe me. And the idea of facing him again, but I can't stay quiet knowing he could hurt you in this place. Robert ran a hand over his face, feeling the weight of this new information. His old friend, the man who was offering to save his business, was actually a con man. Sarah, I don't know what to say. Do you have any proof? She shook her head. Nothing concrete. He made sure to cover his tracks well, but I swear on my life that I'm telling the truth. Robert looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of deception. He only saw sincerity and fear. I believe you, he finally said. But what do we do now? Mike is still pressuring me with his investment offer. Don't accept it, Sarah urged. Whatever he's planning, it can't be good. I know his tactics. First he gains your trust, then... They were interrupted by the sound of the restaurant door opening. Mike's voice resonated in the empty establishment. Robert, where are you, my friend? I have exciting news about our future partnership. Sarah paled. Robert stood up, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Stay here, I'll handle this. As he left the office to confront Mike, Robert felt like he was walking into a storm. Sarah's revelations had changed everything, and now he was facing a dangerous game with a man who apparently wasn't who he claimed to be. The approaching confrontation promised to be the turning point in Robert's, Sarah's, and the future of Mary's kitchen. With each step towards Mike, Robert felt the weight of the decisions he would have to make. Decisions that could save or destroy everything he loved. Robert emerged from his office with forced calm, meeting Mike's bright smile. The contrast between the image of his old friend and Sarah's revelations created a dissonance that turned his stomach. Mike, I wasn't expecting you today, Robert said, trying to maintain a neutral tone. Good news can't wait, my friend, Mike exclaimed, his enthusiasm seemingly genuine. I've been working on the details of our partnership, and I think I have a proposal you can't refuse. Robert felt a pang of anxiety. Mike, about that, I think we need to talk. Mike's smile faltered for an instant, almost imperceptibly. Of course, Robert. What's going on? Robert looked around, aware that Sarah could hear from the office. Let's go outside, shall we? We can talk while we walk. Once on the street, Robert took a deep breath, gathering courage for what he was about to do. Mike, I've been thinking a lot about your offer, and there's something I need to ask you. Mike looked at him expectantly. Go ahead, friend. You know you can ask me anything. Robert stopped, facing Mike directly. Do you know Sarah? The question seemed to take Mike by surprise. For a moment, Robert saw something dark pass through his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by an expression of confusion. Sarah? You mean the woman who was in your kitchen yesterday? No, I don't know her. Why do you ask? Robert carefully studied Mike's face, looking for any sign of deception. It's just that she seemed to recognize you yesterday. And she told me a rather disturbing story about a man who ruined her life. A man who looks a lot like you. Mike's expression hardened, his smile disappearing completely. Robert, I don't know what that woman has told you, but I assure you she's confused. She probably mistakes me for someone else. Are you sure, Mike? Robert pressed, because her story is very specific. She talks about a man who conned her, who used her to steal millions from a company. Mike let out a forced laugh. And you think that man is me? Come on, Robert, we've known each other for years. You know who I am, what I've achieved through hard work. Are you really going to believe the stories of a vagrant? Robert felt a pang of guilt hearing Mike refer to Sarah that way, but he stood firm. I just want the truth, Mike. If there's anything I need to know before considering your offer, now is the time to say it. For a moment, Robert thought he saw a flash of doubt in Mike's eyes, but as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by an expression of determination. "The truth, Robert, is that I'm trying to help you," Mike said, his voice taking on a harder tone. "Your restaurant is on the brink of bankruptcy. Without my investment, in a few months you'll be closing the doors of Mary's Kitchen for good. Is that what you want? To destroy your wife's legacy because of the lies of a stranger?" Mike's words hit Robert like a punch to the stomach. It was true that the restaurant was in trouble, but hearing it like that, so bluntly— "They're not lies," a trembling voice interrupted his thoughts. Both men turned to see Sarah standing in the entrance of the restaurant. Her face was pale, but there was a determination in her eyes that Robert hadn't seen before. "Sarah, you don't have to do this," Robert said softly. But Sarah stepped forward, facing Mike directly. "I remember you, Mike Thompson. I remember every promise you made to me, every lie you told me, and I remember how you disappeared when everything fell apart, leaving me to take the blame for your crimes." Mike looked at her with a mixture of surprise and something that almost seemed like recognition. For a moment, his facade cracked, and Robert saw a shadow of guilt cross his face. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mike said, but his voice lacked the confidence from before. "You know very well," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength. "You were the company's financial director. You romanced me, convinced me that you needed access to certain accounts for a special project, and when the money disappeared, all the evidence pointed to me." Robert watched the exchange, feeling the ground move beneath his feet. Sarah's story was coming to life before his eyes, and Mike's reaction was all the confirmation he needed. "Mike," Robert said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "is this true?" Mike looked from Robert to Sarah, and for a moment it seemed like he was going to confess, but then his expression hardened. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "I don't have to listen to these accusations. Robert, I thought we were friends, that you trusted me. But I see you prefer to believe the stories of a woman you barely know." He turned to leave, but Robert grabbed his arm. "Mike, wait. If all of this is a misunderstanding, we can clear it up. But if there's any truth to what Sarah is saying—" Mike jerked away abruptly. "My offer still stands, Robert, but not for long. Think carefully about what you're doing. Are you going to throw away the only chance you have to save the restaurant?" With those words, Mike walked away in large strides, leaving Robert and Sarah in a silence charged with tension. Robert turned to Sarah, who seemed about to collapse. "Let's go inside," he said softly, guiding her back to the restaurant. Once inside, Sarah collapsed into a chair, trembling. Robert served her a glass of water and sat down across from her. "I'm sorry," Sarah murmured. "I didn't want to cause trouble. But when I saw him, when I heard his plans for the restaurant, I couldn't stay quiet and watch him do the same thing to you that he did to me." Robert took her hand, surprised by the protective gesture he felt towards this woman he barely knew. "Don't apologize, you did the right thing, but now I need you to tell me everything, every detail." Sarah nodded, taking a sip of water before beginning. "It all started 5 years ago, when I was working as an accountant at Global Finance." As Sarah unraveled the complete story of her past with Mike, Robert listened attentively, feeling that each word changed not only his perception of the present, but also his plans for the future. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, bathing Mary's Kitchen in a golden glow. Robert knew that the decisions he would make in the coming hours would determine not only the fate of the restaurant, but also his own and Sarah's. The truth had come to light, but the price of that truth was yet to be determined. And as night fell over the city, Robert prepared himself for the battle he knew was coming. The days following the confrontation with Mike were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions for Robert. The revelation of his old friend's true nature had shaken him to the core, forcing him to reevaluate not only his current situation, but also years of friendship and trust. Sarah, for her part, seemed to have found new strength after confronting her past. Although she still showed signs of nervousness every time the doorbell rang, she worked with renewed determination, as if each dish washed and each table cleaned were an act of redemption. One morning, as Robert reviewed the restaurant's accounts in his small office, He felt the weight of reality fall on his shoulders. The numbers didn't lie. Without Mike's investment, Mary's Kitchen wouldn't survive more than a few months. Mr. Garcia. Sarah's soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. She was standing in the doorway, holding a cup of coffee. "I thought you might need this." Robert smiled gratefully, accepting the cup. "Thank you, Sarah. And please, just Robert. I think after everything that's happened, we can drop the formalities." Sarah nodded, hesitating a moment before speaking. "Robert, I know you're worried about the restaurant. I've been thinking maybe I could help more. I have experience in accounting. I could review the books, see if there's any way to optimize expenses." Robert looked at her in surprise. Despite everything Sarah had told him about her past, he sometimes forgot that before the events that led her to the streets, she had been a respected professional. "That would be a great help, Sarah. But I don't want to take advantage of your goodwill. You already do so much for the restaurant." Sarah sat down across from him, her expression serious. "Robert, you gave me a chance when no one else would. You gave me back my dignity. Let me do this for you, for the restaurant, please." Robert felt a wave of emotion at Sarah's words. In recent weeks, she had become much more than just an employee. She was a friend, a confidant, someone he could trust in these difficult times. "All right," he finally agreed. "I'll show you the books and we'll work on this together." For the next few hours, Robert and Sarah immersed themselves in the restaurant's numbers. Sarah quickly demonstrated that she hadn't lost her touch with finances, identifying areas where costs could be reduced and suggesting strategies to increase revenue. As they worked side by side, Robert couldn't help but notice the ease with which they understood each other, the way their ideas complemented each other. It was as if Sarah had filled a void in the restaurant and in his life that he didn't even know existed. As the sun began to set, bathing the office in a golden light, Robert leaned back in his chair, rubbing his tired eyes. "I think that's enough for today," he said with a sigh. "You've been a great help, Sarah. I don't know how to thank you." Sarah smiled at him, a genuine smile that lit up her face in a way that made Robert's heart skip a beat. "You don't have to thank me. This place, it means a lot to me too." There was a moment of silence, charged with something that neither of them dared to name. Robert found himself looking at Sarah, noticing for the first time how beautiful her eyes were when they weren't clouded by fear or sadness. The moment was interrupted by the sound of the phone. Robert answered, his expression changing from surprise to concern as he listened. "Emily." "What?" "No, honey. You don't need to—" "Yes, I understand, but—" Okay, I'll wait for you." He hung up the phone, his face a mix of emotions. "Is everything all right?" Sarah asked, concerned. Robert ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that Sarah had learned to associate with his nervousness. "It was my daughter, Emily. She says she's coming here. Apparently, she's been investigating on her own and discovered how bad the restaurant situation is. She wants to help." "That's good, isn't it?" Sarah said, although she could sense the tension in Robert's voice. "Yes, but I didn't want her to worry, to leave her life in the city for this. And now, with everything about Mike—" Robert trailed off, looking at Sarah with an apologetic expression. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to—" Sarah shook her head. "Don't worry. I understand it's a complicated situation. Maybe I should leave before your daughter arrives. I don't want to cause more problems." She got up to leave, but Robert stopped her, taking her hand. The contact sent an electric current through both of them. "No, Sarah, you don't have to leave. You're part of this now, part of the restaurant, part—" He stopped, unsure of how to continue. Sarah looked at him, her eyes full of an emotion that Robert didn't dare to name. Part of what? Something they could no longer ignore. Emily appeared in the doorway, her expression of determination changing to confusion when she saw Sarah. "Dad, what's going on here?" Robert took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. "Emily, there's a lot I need to tell you, about the restaurant, about Mike, and about Sarah." As night fell over Mary's Kitchen, Robert faced a crossroads. The revelations he was about to make would not only affect the future of the restaurant, but also his relationships with the two women who now occupied such an important place in his life. The fate of Mary's legacy, Sarah's future, and the growing feelings between Robert and Sarah were about to collide. And in the midst of it all, Mike's shadow still lurked, a silent threat that promised to complicate things even further. The tension in the small office was palpable as Emily looked alternately at her father and the unfamiliar woman beside him. Robert could see the confusion and concern in his daughter's eyes, so similar to Mary's. "Emily, please sit down," Robert said, indicating the chair Sarah had just vacated. "There's a lot I need to explain to you." Emily sat down, her posture rigid, ready to absorb any information her father was about to share. "Who is she?" she asked, looking at Sarah. "My name is Sarah," she responded softly. "I've been helping your father in the restaurant." Robert nodded, grateful for Sarah's intervention. "Emily, Sarah has been a great help in these recent times, but there's much more to it than that. You see, the restaurant situation is more complicated than I've let you know." Emily frowned. "Dad, I already know things aren't going well. That's why I came. But what does this woman have to do with all of this?" Robert took a deep breath before beginning to narrate the events of the past few weeks. He told her about Mike's offer, the initial suspicions, and finally, the truth that Sarah had revealed about his supposed friend's past. As the story unfolded, Emily went from surprise to indignation, and finally, to deep concern. "Dad, why didn't you tell me any of this? Do you have any idea how dangerous this could have been?" "I know, sweetheart," Robert replied, guilt evident in his voice. "I wanted to protect you. I didn't want you to worry. But now I see that was a mistake." Emily turned to Sarah, her gaze now softer but still cautious. "And you? How did you end up involved in all of this?" Sarah, who had remained silent during Robert's narration, stepped forward. "Your father gave me a chance when no one else would. He offered me work, food, and most importantly, dignity. When I saw that Mike was planning to do to the restaurant what he did to me, I couldn't stay quiet." Emily listened attentively as Sarah shared her own story, her voice occasionally trembling as she recalled the most painful moments. When she finished, silence filled the room, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Emily spoke. "Dad, Sarah, I appreciate your honesty, but now we have to think about what we're going to do. Mike is still a threat, and the restaurant is still in financial trouble, right?" Robert nodded, suddenly feeling very tired. "Yes, despite the improvements we've managed to make with Sarah's help, the situation is still critical." "Then we have to act," Emily said with determination. "We can't allow Mum's legacy to be lost, and we certainly can't let someone like Mike get away with it." "What do you propose?" Robert asked, feeling a mixture of pride and concern at his daughter's determination. "First, we need evidence against Mike. If what Sarah says is true, there must be some trace of his past activities. Second, we have to revitalize the restaurant, attract new customers, maybe modernize a bit without losing the essence." Sarah, who had been listening attentively, intervened. "I think I can help with the first part. I still have some contacts from my days at the company. Maybe they can provide us with information about Mike's activities." Robert looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that he didn't dare to name. "Sarah, you don't have to do this. You've already risked a lot." "I want to do it, Robert," she replied firmly. "This place, you've given me a second chance. I want to fight for that." Emily observed the exchange between her father and Sarah with a thoughtful expression. There was something in the way they looked at each other, in the softness of their voices when addressing one another, that reminded her of the relationship her parents once had. "Well," Emily finally said, "then it's decided. Sarah, you'll be in charge of investigating Mike. Dad and I will focus on the restaurant. I have some ideas that I think could work." Robert nodded, feeling for the first time in weeks a clear purpose. "Okay, but Emily, what about your job in the city?" Emily smiled, a smile that was a mixture of determination and nostalgia. "I asked for temporary leave. This place, Mum's dream. It's more important now. Besides," she added, with a significant look towards Sarah, "it seems a lot has happened in my absence." Sarah blushed slightly, while Robert cleared his throat, uncomfortable. "All right then, I think we have a plan. We'll start implementing it tomorrow." As they prepared to close the restaurant that night, each lost in their own thoughts about the challenges that lay ahead. Emily approached her father. "Dad," she said quietly so Sarah couldn't hear, "is there anything else I should know? About you and Sarah, I mean." Robert froze for a moment, surprised by his daughter's insight. "Emily, it's complicated. Sarah has been through a lot, and Emily put a hand on her father's arm. "It's okay, Dad. Just be careful, okay? And remember that Mom always wanted you to be happy." With those words, Emily walked away to help Sarah with the last cleaning tasks, leaving Robert with a whirlwind of emotions. He looked at Mary's photo hanging on the wall, her eternal smile reminding him of happier times. "What should I do? Mary," he whispered to his late wife's image. "How can I protect our legacy and at the same time move forward?" As night fell over Mary's kitchen, Robert felt they were on the brink of great change. The decisions they would make in the coming days would not only affect the future of the restaurant, but also their personal lives. With Mike still representing an unknown threat, the restaurant's financial challenges, and the growing feelings between Robert and Sarah, the road ahead was full of uncertainty. But for the first time in a long time, Robert felt a spark of hope. With his daughter by his side and Sarah supporting them, maybe, just maybe, they could overcome any obstacle that came their way. The real test was just beginning, and only time would tell if love, family, and determination would be enough to save not only the restaurant, but also the hearts of everyone involved. The following days were a whirlwind of activity at Mary's kitchen. Emily, with her fresh energy and innovative ideas, brought new life to the restaurant. Meanwhile, Sarah worked diligently behind the scenes, using her old contacts to gather information about Mike. Robert observed all of this with a mixture of pride and anxiety. Seeing his daughter so committed to the restaurant filled his heart, but he couldn't help worrying about the risks they were taking in confronting Mike. One morning, as Emily and Sarah were discussing new marketing strategies, Robert interrupted them with unexpected news. "Mike called," he said, his voice tense. "He wants to meet with me this afternoon. Says he has a final proposal that I can't refuse." Emily frowned. "Dad, you can't go alone. It's dangerous." "I agree," Sarah added, concern evident in her voice. "Mike is unpredictable. We don't know what he's capable of." Robert sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "I know, but I also know that if I don't go, things could get worse. We need to buy time while we gather evidence against him." After a heated discussion, they agreed that Robert would meet Mike at a nearby cafe, while Emily and Sarah would wait at a nearby table, ready to intervene if necessary. That afternoon, Robert entered the cafe with his heart pounding. He saw Mike sitting in a corner, his confident smile so familiar and now so unsettling. "Robert, old friend," Mike greeted, gesturing for him to sit. "I'm glad you've reconsidered our conversation." Robert sat down, maintaining a neutral expression. "I haven't reconsidered anything, Mike. I'm just here to listen to what you have to say." Mike's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Come on, Robert. You know my offer is the only way to save the restaurant. I've been patient, but my patience has limits. This is your last chance." As Mike spoke, detailing an offer that sounded more and more like a veiled threat, Robert noticed something in his behavior. There was a subtle nervousness, a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. "Mike," Robert interrupted, "what's really going on? You seem worried." For a moment, Mike's mask of confidence slipped, revealing an expression of genuine anxiety. "I don't know what you're talking about," he quickly replied, "but the damage was already done." Robert leaned forward, feeling he had the upper hand for the first time. "I think you do. Does it have something to do with your past, with the people you've conned?" Mike visibly paled. "What do you know about that?" he hissed, all pretense of friendship forgotten. "Enough," Robert replied calmly, "and soon I'll know more. Mike, it's not too late to do the right thing. Confess, return the money you stole. We can find a solution." For a moment, it seemed like Mike was going to consider the offer, but then his expression hardened. "You don't know what you're getting into, Robert. You have until the end of the week to accept my offer, or you'll regret it." With those words, Mike abruptly stood up and left the cafe, leaving Robert alone with his thoughts. Minutes later, Emily and Sarah joined him at the table. "What happened, Dad?" Emily asked, worried. Robert told them about the conversation, including Mike's reaction when he mentioned his past. Sarah listened attentively, her mind working quickly. "This confirms my suspicions," Sarah said. "I've been in contact with some ex-colleagues. It seems Mike is under investigation for fraud in several of his businesses. He's desperate to get clean money to cover his tracks." Emily nodded. "Processing the information. That explains his insistence on buying the restaurant. But what do we do now? We have less than a week before he fulfills his threat." Robert looked at the two women who had become his strength in these difficult times. "Now, we fight. Emily, we'll continue with your plan to revitalize the restaurant. Sarah, I need you to keep investigating. Any evidence you can get against Mike could be crucial." "And you, Dad?" Emily asked. Robert smiled, a smile that mixed determination and a touch of his old adventurous spirit. "I'm going to do what I do best. Cook. We're going to organize a special event, something that attracts the whole community. We'll show everyone that Mary's Kitchen not only survives but thrives." As they left the cafe, Robert couldn't help but notice how Sarah took his hand, giving it a comforting squeeze. The gesture, though small, filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, as Robert prepared for bed, he looked at Mary's photo on his nightstand. "We're in the home stretch, my love," he whispered. "Give me strength for what's to come." With Mike's threat hanging over them like a dark cloud, but with a plan and the determination to fight, Robert, Emily, and Sarah prepared for the final battle. The future of Mary's Kitchen and their own destinies were at stake, and they were determined not to give up without a fight. The week ahead promised to be the most challenging of their lives, but also the one that could bring redemption and a new beginning for all. The countdown had begun, and every moment counted in their struggle to save not only the restaurant, but also their dreams and their family. The next few days at Mary's Kitchen were a whirlwind of activity. Emily, with her tireless energy, implemented a series of changes that began to bear fruit almost immediately. She updated the menu, keeping the classic dishes that customers loved, but adding more modern and healthy options. She also created a strong social media presence, sharing stories about the restaurant and its importance to the community. Sarah, for her part, worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Her contacts had begun to provide valuable information about Mike's fraudulent activities. Each new piece of evidence was like a small victory, bringing them one step closer to the truth. Robert Eber, inspired by the dedication of both women, found new vigor in the kitchen. He dusted off old recipes from Mary, adding his own modern twist. The aroma of spices and fresh herbs once again filled the air of the restaurant, attracting both old and new customers alike. As the end of the week approached, the tension was palpable in the air. Mike's ultimatum weighed on them, but it also gave them a sense of urgency that drove their efforts. The night before the big event they had planned, Robert found himself alone in the kitchen, preparing the final details. The silence of the empty restaurant allowed him to reflect on everything that had happened in recent weeks. "Need any help?" A soft voice pulled him from his thoughts. Sarah was at the kitchen door, her presence bringing an immediate warmth to the space. Robert smiled. "Grateful for the company. Your help is always welcome. How's the investigation going?" Sarah approached, taking a knife to help cut vegetables. "I have good news. My contacts have managed to gather enough evidence to present a solid case against Mike. Financial documents, testimonies. I think this time he won't be able to escape." Robert let out a sigh of relief. "Sarah, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. You've risked so much for us." "I do it because I believe in this place, Robert," Sarah replied, her eyes meeting his. "I believe in you." There was a moment of silence charged with emotion. Robert found himself lost in Sarah's eyes, feeling a connection that went beyond gratitude or friendship. "Sarah, Robert began, but was interrupted by the sound of the door opening. "Dad!" "Sarah!" Emily's voice echoed in the empty restaurant. "You have to see this." They both hurried out of the kitchen. Emily was standing in the dining room, her face illuminated by her phone screen. "What's going on, honey?" Robert asked, worried. Emily showed them the phone. On the screen was a local news article with a shocking headline, "Local businessman under investigation for massive fraud." "It's Mike," Emily explained, her voice mixing excitement and caution. "It looks like the authorities have officially started investigating him. This could change everything." The three looked at each other, a mixture of hope and apprehension on their faces. They knew this could be the final blow they needed against Mike, but also that it would make him more dangerous than ever. "We must be cautious," Sarah warned. "Mike will be desperate now. We don't know what he's capable of." Robert nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "You're right. Tomorrow will be a crucial day. The event we've planned could be our last chance to save the restaurant and confront Mike once and for all." They stayed up late that night, finalizing preparations for the big day. As they worked, Robert couldn't help but notice how Emily and Sarah had formed a formidable team. His daughter, with her energy and modern vision, perfectly complemented Sarah's experience and wisdom. When they finally finished, exhausted but satisfied, Robert looked at them with pride. "I don't know what I would have done without you two," he said, his voice charged with emotion. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know how grateful I am." Emily hugged her father, while Sarah looked at them with a warm smile. "We're a family now," Emily said, "and families face everything together." Those words resonated in Robert's heart. Family, yes, that's what they were now. And for his family, for Mary's legacy, he was willing to face any challenge that tomorrow might bring. That night, as each retired to rest, the atmosphere in Mary's kitchen was one of anticipation. The aroma of preparations for the next day's event floated in the air, mixing with hope and fear for what was to come. Robert, in the solitude of his room, looked once more at Mary's photo. "Tomorrow is the day, my love," he whispered. "I hope you're proud of what we've accomplished." With his heart full of determination and the echo of Emily's words about family resonating in his mind, Robert prepared for what he knew would be one of the most important days of his life. The fate of Mary's kitchen, and that of all those he now called family, would be decided in the next 24 hours. The stage was set, the actors in their positions. All that remained was to wait for dawn and the start of a battle that would determine not only the future of the restaurant, but also the course of their lives. Dawn brought with it a mixture of anticipation and nervousness to Mary's kitchen. Robert woke up before sunrise, his mind already spinning with final preparations for the big event. As he came down to the kitchen, he was surprised to find Sarah already there, working diligently. "Good morning," she greeted him with a warm smile. "I thought I'd start early. There's so much to do." Robert felt a wave of gratitude and something more, something he still didn't dare to name. "Thank you, Sarah. I don't know what I'd do without you." They worked in comfortable silence, moving around the kitchen in a synchronized dance that spoke of the trust and connection they had developed. Shortly after, Emily joined them, bringing with her a fresh and determined energy. "All right, team," Emily said, unfolding a task list. "Let's go over the plan one more time." As they discussed the final details, the restaurant came to life around them. The first rays of sun filtered through the windows, illuminating the space that would soon be filled with people from the community. The event they had planned was ambitious, a celebration of local cuisine, highlighting the traditional dishes that had made Mary's kitchen famous, along with new creations that represented the restaurant's future. They had invited local journalists, social media influencers, and most importantly, the neighbors and loyal customers who had supported the restaurant for years. As the opening time approached, the tension was palpable. Robert couldn't help but constantly glance at the door, expecting to see Mike at any moment. "Dad," Emily said, putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Whatever happens today, we're in this together. Mike can't take that away from us." Robert nodded, grateful for his daughter's support. He looked at Sarah, who was organizing the last details in the dining room, and felt a wave of determination. He wasn't going to let Mike destroy everything they had built. The doors opened and people began to enter. The aroma of the special dishes Robert had prepared filled the air, mixing with the buzz of conversations and laughter. The atmosphere was festive, full of hope and community. Emily moved among the guests, charming everyone with her charisma and passion for the restaurant. Sarah, meanwhile, ensured that everything ran smoothly behind the scenes, her efficiency and calm an anchor in the midst of organized chaos. Robert was in his element, cooking and sharing stories about the dishes and their history. Every time a customer expressed delight at the food, he felt he was honoring Mary's legacy. It was in the midst of this celebration when the door opened once more and Mike entered. The buzz seemed to diminish for a moment as everyone felt the tension his presence brought. Robert exchanged a quick glance with Emily and Sarah. The moment they had been waiting for and dreading had arrived. Mike approached Robert, his tense smile contrasting with the hardness in his eyes. "I see you've been busy, old friend," he said, his voice barely hiding a threat. "Can we talk in private?" Robert nodded, guiding Mike towards his office. Emily and Sarah followed discreetly, ready to intervene if necessary. Once in the office, Mike's facade crumbled. "What do you think you're doing, Robert?" he hissed. "Do you think this little show will change anything? You know you can't save this place without me." Robert straightened up, facing Mike with a calm that surprised even himself. "You're wrong, Mike. This place is already saved. By the community, by my family, by people who really care about it, not by con men like you." Mike's face contorted with rage. "You don't know what you're talking about. You need my money, my influence. Without me, this place will close in months." "No, Mike," Sarah intervened, entering the office. "It's you who doesn't know what you're talking about. We have evidence of your frauds, of all the people you've conned, including me." Mike visibly paled. "You? What have you done?" At that moment, Emily entered, holding her phone. "The authorities are on their way. Mike, it's over." The realization of his defeat seemed to hit Mike suddenly. His posture deflated and, for a moment, Robert saw the scared and desperate man behind the facade of confidence. I just wanted," Mike began, but was interrupted by the sound of sirens approaching. Robert looked at Mike, feeling a mixture of pity and disappointment. "You can still do the right thing, Mike. Confess. Help the people you've hurt." For a moment, it seemed like Mike was going to respond, but then the restaurant doors opened and 2 police officers entered. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Mike was escorted out of the restaurant, the officers took statements, and the guests watched with a mixture of amazement and confusion. When the dust settled, Robert found himself standing in the middle of his restaurant, surrounded by Emily and Sarah. The event continued around them, the community rallying in support of Mary's kitchen. "We did it," Emily whispered, hugging her father. Robert nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and disbelief. He looked at Sarah, who was smiling at them with tears in her eyes. Without thinking, he extended his hand to her, drawing her into the hug. "We did it together," Robert said, his voice charged with emotion. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Mary's kitchen, illuminating this new and unconventional family, Robert felt that a chapter of his life was closing and another, full of possibilities, was opening before him. The restaurant buzzed with life, customers enjoying the food and company. Mary's legacy was safe, but more than that, Kat had evolved into something new and beautiful. Robert looked at Emily and Sarah, the 2 women who had changed his life in ways he never could have imagined, and knew that whatever happened, they would face the future together. The battle was over, but the real adventure was just beginning. The weeks following the dramatic confrontation with Mike were a whirlwind of activity for Robert, Emily, and Sarah. News of what had happened at Mary's kitchen spread quickly through the community, drawing a wave of support and curiosity that kept the restaurant busier than ever. Emily, taking advantage of the renewed interest, launched a social media campaign telling the story of the restaurant's struggle and triumph. The posts went viral, attracting attention from local media and even some national outlets. "Dad, you won't believe this," Emily exclaimed one morning, bursting into the kitchen with her tablet in hand. "A national food magazine wants to do a feature on us. They say our story is inspiring." Robert, who was preparing the dough for the day's bread, looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and amazement. "Really, wow, that's incredible." Sarah, who was helping with the accounting at a nearby table, smiled. "You deserve it, Robert. All of you. This is the perfect opportunity to show the world how special this place is. Robert felt a wave of gratitude towards both women. "We wouldn't have gotten this far without you two," he said, his voice charged with emotion. The days passed in a frenzy of preparations for the feature. Robert dusted off old recipes, perfecting each dish. Emily took care of logistics and promotion, while Sarah contributed her eye for detail, ensuring everything was impeccable. The morning of the feature manor, Robert woke up before dawn, nervous but excited. As he came down to the kitchen, he was surprised to find Sarah already there, preparing coffee. "Good morning," she greeted with a warm smile. "I thought you might need this." Robert took the cup of coffee, his fingers lightly brushing Sarah's. The brief contact sent an electric current through both of them. "Thank you, Sarah," Robert said, his voice soft. "I don't know what I'd do without you." They looked at each other for a moment, the air between them charged with an emotion that neither dared to name yet. The moment was interrupted by Emily's arrival, who entered the kitchen with her characteristic energy. "Good morning, team," she exclaimed. "Are you ready for the big day?" As they immersed themselves in the final preparations, Robert couldn't help but reflect on how things had changed just a few months ago. He was on the verge of losing everything. Now, Mary's kitchen was flourishing, and he found himself surrounded by a love and support he never thought possible after the loss of his wife. The magazine team arrived punctually, filling the restaurant with the bustle of cameras and interviews. Robert found himself sharing the restaurant's story, his eyes shining with passion as he spoke about Mary, the challenges they had faced, and how Emily and Sarah had been instrumental in saving the business. "And tell us, Mr. Garcia," the journalist asked, "what do you think is the secret to Mary's Kitchen's success?" Robert paused, looking at Emily and Sarah, who were nearby listening. "Love," he finally replied. "Love for food, for family, for community. That's what Mary always wanted this place to be, and it's what has kept us strong even in the toughest times." The interview continued, with Emily passionately talking about her plans for the restaurant's future, and Sarah sharing her perspective on how authenticity and connection with the community were key to any business's success. When the magazine team finally left, it was late in the evening. Robert, Tross, Emily and Sarah sat exhausted but satisfied at one of the tables in the empty restaurant. "We did it," Emily said, raising her glass of lemonade in an impromptu toast. "Sans to moi to Mary's Kitchen, and to us." "To us," Robert and Sarah repeated, their eyes meeting over their glasses. At that moment, Robert felt it was time to address something that had been on his mind for weeks. "Emily, Sarah," he began, his voice slightly trembling. "There's something I want to propose to you." Both women looked at him expectantly. "These last few months have made me realize how fortunate I am to have both of you in my life. Emily, you've always been my pride and joy. And Sarah," he paused, looking at her tenderly, "you've become an essential part of our lives." He took a deep breath before continuing. "I've been thinking, how would you feel about making this official? We could make Mary's Kitchen a family business officially, the three of us as equal partners." Emily gasped in surprise, while Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Dad, are you sure?" Emily asked. "This place is your life." "Mom's legacy," Robert nodded. "I'm sure Mary always wanted this place to be a home, a place of love and family, and that's what we've built here, the three of us together." Sarah, who had remained silent, finally spoke. "Robert, I don't know what to say. After everything I've been through, I never thought I'd have a chance like this. A family like this." Robert took Sarah's hand, and with the other, Emily's. "So, what do you say? Partners?" "Partners," Emily replied with a bright smile. "Partners," Sarah whispered, squeezing Robert's hand. In that moment, Robert felt that everything was in its place. The restaurant had not only survived, but had evolved into something more beautiful than he had ever imagined, and he, who once believed his life was coming to an end, found himself on the threshold of a new beginning. As the night progressed, the three stayed in the restaurant, talking animatedly about their plans for the future. The aroma of spices and the echo of their laughter filled the air, and Robert could have sworn he felt Mary's presence, smiling approvingly from somewhere beyond. Mary's kitchen had always been a place of love, and now more than ever, that love was blooming in new and unexpected ways. With Emily and Sarah by his side, Robert knew they were writing a new chapter in the restaurant's story, one full of promise, hope, and above all, family. Months passed, and Mary's kitchen flourished under the direction of its 3 new partners. The magazine article had generated renewed interest in the restaurant, attracting customers from all over the region. But beyond commercial success, it was the warm family atmosphere that kept people coming back again and again. One Sunday afternoon, almost a year after the dramatic events that had changed their lives, Robert was in the kitchen, preparing a new special dish. The aroma of spices and fresh herbs filled the air, mingling with the sound of laughter coming from the dining room. Emily entered the kitchen, her face radiant. "Dad, you have to see this," she said, taking his hand and leading him to the dining room. What Robert saw took his breath away. The restaurant was full, but not just with customers. He saw neighbors, friends, people who had been part of their lives for years. In one corner, Sarah was chatting animatedly with a group of women Robert recognized as her former co-workers, women who had once rejected her but now looked at her with admiration and respect. "What's all this?" Robert asked, overwhelmed by the scene. "It's a celebration," Emily replied with a smile. "For you, for us, for everything we've accomplished this year." Sarah approached them, her eyes shining with a mixture of happiness and something deeper when she looked at Robert. "It was Emily's idea," she explained. "We thought it was time to officially recognize our new family." Robert felt his heart swell with emotion. He looked around, seeing the smiling faces of the people he loved. The restaurant that had been his life for so long, now reborn and thriving. I don't know what to say," he murmured, his voice breaking with emotion. "You don't have to say anything, Dad," Emily said, hugging him. "Just enjoy the moment." The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of conversations, laughter, and, of course, delicious food. Robert moved among the guests, sharing stories, receiving congratulations, and above all, feeling the love and support of his community. As the sun began to set, bathing the restaurant in a golden light, Robert found himself standing next to Mary's photo that had always presided over the place. He felt a presence beside him and knew, without looking, that it was Sarah. "She would be very proud," Sarah said softly, "of you, of Emily, of everything you've achieved." Robert turned to her, taking her hands in his. "Of what we've achieved, Sarah, none of this would have been possible without you." They looked at each other for a long moment, years of unexpressed emotions flowing between them. Slowly, almost as if it were the most natural thing in the world, they leaned towards each other, their lips meeting in a soft and tender kiss. When they separated, Robert saw tears in Sarah's eyes. "Robert, I know," he said, caressing her cheek. "Me too." A soft cough made them turn. Emily was there, a knowing smile on her face. "It's about time," she said, laughing softly. "Mom would be happy, Dad. She always wanted you to find love again." Robert felt his heart fill with a joy he hadn't experienced in years. Surrounded by the love of his daughter and Sarah, with the affection of his community filling the restaurant, he knew he had found something precious and rare, a second chance at life and love. That night, long after the last guest had left, Robert, Emily, and Sarah sat at a table, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about the future. "You know," Robert said, looking at the 2 women who had changed his life, "I think I finally understand what the secret ingredient of Mary's kitchen is." "Oh yeah?" Emily asked, intrigued. "And what is it?" Robert smiled, taking Sarah's hand and looking lovingly at his daughter. "Love, not just in the food, but in everything we do. It's love that gives flavor to life." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes shining with emotion. "And love is what has brought us here." "To love," Emily toasted, raising her glass. "And to family." "To family," Robert and Sarah repeated in unison. As the sound of their clinking glasses filled the air, Robert felt a deep peace. Mary's Kitchen had always been more than just a restaurant. It was a home, a refuge, a place where dreams could come true and where love in all its forms could flourish. And now, with Emily and Sarah by his side, Robert knew they were writing a new chapter in the restaurant's story. A chapter full of hope, second chances, and above all the sweet and enduring taste of love. As the night progressed and the moon rose over the city, softly illuminating the Mary's Kitchen sign, Robert knew with certainty that his wife's legacy was not only safe, but had evolved into something even more beautiful than he could have ever imagined. The future stretched out before them, full of promises and possibilities, and together, as a family, they were ready to savor it, one day at a time.